Welcome to Chief Influencer. I'm your host, Anthony Schaap, co-founder of Social Driver. Washington is the center of influence in the US and arguably the world. We are featuring leaders who figured out how to break through in today's fragmented and noisy world. Social Driver teamed up with the Communications Board and the George Washington University College of Professional Studies to recognize these leaders as chief influencers and highlight how they inspire and influence others. This is Anthony Schaap, and I'm excited to welcome you to a very special episode of Chief Influencer. Today, we're featuring some of the most inspiring guests we've had on the show, and it just so happens they are all women. You'll hear from Oscar winner turned Trevor Project founder Peggy Rajski, former Houston Mayor Annise Parker, CNN hero Yasmine Arrington, White House cyber and AI czar Camille Stewart Gloster, ad agency legend Cary Hatch, Points of Light CEO Jennifer Sirangelo, healthcare innovator Silvia Taylor, science luminary Maya Ajmera, Substack influencer Lia Haberman, and Accenture diversity champion Nedra Dickson. In each conversation, I learned something about how to influence, from inside a huge company to as broad as the general public. The conversations today are relevant to anyone in a leadership or communications role, but no matter who you're trying to reach, we're going to hear some similar themes, one of which is authentic leadership. Up first, ad agency legend Cary Hatch shares about the importance of being a translator. So you bring a unique perspective to how an organization measures and monitors its success.
Yes, that's right. And one of the things that I've been in several discussions with other C-suite executives, I also believe it's incumbent upon us in the marketing communications world to be fluent in the language of finance. It's not just our language. And sometimes as marketers, we get our own cocoon and talk our own acronyms and what have you. We need to translate that into board speak. We need to get a seat at the table, to be taken seriously. It's important that you're fluent in finance and can demonstrate that value and what that really means.
You know, I think that's such an important point when we think about influence, right? For anybody, for marketing, your lesson is you have to understand finance and board speak if you want to influence those decision makers and help them see what you're trying to, where you're leading them. But that's true for any leader in any area. Maybe the finance people also might need to learn a little bit of the marketing speak, right? If they're trying to collaborate there. If we don't get out of our own cocoon, as you said it, and get comfortable with the language of others, it's kind of hard to influence people who are outside of our sphere, isn't it? We know that you have so much experience in both business and communications and marketing. I'm wondering if there are any places outside of those spheres that you get inspiration for the work you do, how you show up, how you influence. What inspires you?
People inspire me. You inspire me. Everyday CEOs. No, you do. Entrepreneurs, even if they're starting up, I remember that feeling. I remember that passion. And I would also say that I'm a student of others. So because I started at such an early age, people like John Hendricks, who discovered Discovery, Ted Leonsis, of AOL legacy, but now Monumental Sports, Kevin Plank, guys that had ideas and inspiration and the tenacity to go out and make something happen. Steve Jobs, there's others in my industry, Shelley Lazarus, the former chairman of Ogilvy and Mather. But even more recently, people like Cricket Witten with Spanx, people who followed their passion, followed their dream. Many of these people started their companies with a credit card. And many of them ended up making payroll with a credit card because you go through those peaks and valleys. And I've always loved the underdog, similar to the story about Rudy, for the people who are always told what they can't do and then they prevail. That's what inspires me.
Next up, Jennifer Sirangelo, president and CEO of Points of Light, tells us how she's learned to connect with younger audiences through listening. What are some of the strategies or the tactics that you have found that you could sort of thread through your experience for Age, Boys and Girls Club, where you are now, Points of Light?
Right. Well, one of the things as a leader that I've really learned, and this is like definitely fast forwarding from the small organization I started in, but is really about the importance of listening and learning. So that part of the civic circle really resonates with me. Um, and I've learned a little bit some tactics about how to do it. So let me just give you like the real world example. When you're the CEO of a large, youth development organization, it's really easy to get, I'm in DC, I'm meeting with Congress, I'm meeting with all, but I needed to stay connected to the young people. And my career in youth development spanned, the first kids we were serving were millennials, and now they're the parents of the kids. So I was in youth development long enough that I went through one generation actually. But and their needs changed over time. Like I remember the day that bullying, like the youth came to our center for one of our conferences, and they started talking about bullying and in a different way than I had experienced it as a young person. And then of course it's all accelerated as we now get into a digital age, but that was even before cell phones that came up as a problem. It was actually driven, the kids felt like it was very much driven by the media. But anyway, back to listening. So I really was intentional as a leader in youth development to really ensure I blocked time and I found authentic opportunities to listen to young people where they are. So I would travel to, as an example, I traveled to West Virginia when really the opioid epidemic was getting really scary. And I asked the team to, the people, our folks in West Virginia, I said, I just want to listen to the kids. Let's do it. So they really did a great job. As an example, I've learned that the setting and the timing and the way you approach that listening really matters. So I've done those kinds of sessions when I'm in a conference room in a hotel on the side of a youth conference. So we're sitting in a hotel on a table, and the young people just freeze up. They're like, I'm meeting with the CEO, and they just freeze up. And they answer my questions, but it's really, I was like, this isn't what I want to get to. So I learned to start with a couple things. I started with what I thought we could all have in common. So I would do introductions, and I would say, I'm a big sister. I have 3 siblings. And the kids would go around. Everybody could answer. I'm an only. I'm 2. I'm a little sister. That kind of find the common ground for the very beginning of the listening. And I learned that tactic and I used it, and it worked all the time. So we would start with kind of our family, where do I fit in my family, and how does that impact how I'm involved in my 4-H activities. So that was one thing I did. The other was I also learned that, so the less formal I could get it, the better. And that's hard to do when you're the CEO and everyone wants to make things really nice for you, and they want to have flowers on the table and they want to be on their best behavior. But I learned a way to do it was to block the time in 2 ways. We had to have that formal time around the table and let everybody introduce and talk about the issues. But I learned a couple of, actually by accident, it was from West Virginia, that once you break from that, we were actually at a picnic when I did a listening session in West Virginia around opioids and how it was affecting the kids. And we were outside and it was informal. But as soon as we broke the formal listening and we were no longer in a group, the young people started coming up to me one by one and kind of tugging on my sleeve. Now I want to tell you what's really happened, they would say. And they told me about their friend who had just lost their dad to opioids, or the backpacks that they built for the kids to take home because they didn't have food on the weekends because their parents were or dealing with opioid addiction. So I learned that I needed to do a 2-part listening. I needed to create the formal time to, really get through let them meet me and learn to trust me. But then I had to leave time for that informal.
Silvia Taylor, Executive Vice President and Chief Corporate Affairs and Advocacy Officer at Novavax, shares her perspective on dealing with misinformation. You mentioned one of the buzzwords we all in communications have, used and heard a lot, misinformation.
Yes.
Everybody's dealing with that, no matter what organization they're with. But in your world, this must be a bigger issue than it is for many. I wonder if you could just talk about, as a communicator in your career, and of course now, how do you view misinformation? How do you address misinformation and disinformation? And what advice do you have for someone who might come into a role where this is a big part of their job?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a topic. I have so much to say on that, because I think, misinformation can really be a threat. And the way it can just take off and go viral is really something that people need to pay attention to. And so, for us, I think what's really been important is saying, look, there's a lot of misinformation out there. What we need to do, what we can best do, our best use as an innovative company who developed a vaccine and is making it available, is spread the scientific, the true, credible scientific information that people need to know, not just about COVID, not just about vaccines, but overall about what does all of this mean. And so it's really important to understand that some people you're just not going to be able to move, and so we customize our message of valid science and about what people need to understand about their healthcare and the choices that they make, based on the science, and we just kind of let some of the misinformation hopefully go by the wayside in the face of really credible information that might say something different, and I think that's not just specific to COVID-19. I think you see that misinformation in a lot of different areas, and so I think what we focus on is just kind of staying the course, saying, look, we're going to stand for science, we're going to stand for the consumer perspective, and make sure we get that information out there, and then continue kind of to be consistent about that message.
I think it's such an important perspective, because with so much, stuff out there, misinformation and rumors and all kinds of stuff, it can be really distracting. And, it's very easy to want to go chase and correct all of those things. And sometimes that might actually even fan the flames. And so knowing sort of your true north and focusing on that, in your case, use the science and the credible information, obviously you have to pay attention to what folks are saying out there. But if you spend all your time trying to react to that, it really can detract from your core focus.
Yeah, I think you're 100. You almost said better what I was trying to say, which I think is, like, stay the course. At the end of the day, for us, we're championing science. We're championing the things that people can do to keep themselves and their loved ones well. And you can't get distracted by things that people may say otherwise, other than to, of course, we're taking note, and we're making sure we customize the message to appeal to people. So, for example, if there are certain buzzwords they don't like, in vaccines, I'll give you one: mandates. People don't want to be mandated. They don't want to be told what to do. So what we do is we talk about the benefits of getting vaccinated, right? And, what's the science say? What's the potential for a vaccine? And we speak in that kind of language so that people feel empowered to make a decision that's right for them. And so I think all communicators do that, right? Whether it's vaccines, whether it's COVID, you're always looking to understand, what does the audience need to hear? What's going to trigger them? What's going to turn them off from your message? And you customize your message, but you have to keep at what you're calling, I love that term, that true north. You have to know where you're going, and you have to continue to put that information out there. And then what I have found is that while there will be people on the fringes, there will be outliers in either direction, you're going to reach the majority of people with the message that you need to, if you stay consistent to the facts and to what your message is. It's really about discipline.
Next up, Peggy, an Oscar-winning filmmaker and founder of the Trevor Project, takes us back to the moment that influenced her to start the organization and how it has come to save countless lives as a result. Who do you have to influence to make the impact you want to see in the world?
It is a wide range of folks, that's for sure. I think when I think about the history with the Trevor Project, the first place we had to start was actually who's going to support it. And the first person I had to convince was someone I wanted to partner with to be the person that was a well-respected expert in the field of suicide prevention, Dr. James Nagdeman. And he was thrilled with this idea and was running one of the most successful and well-respected suicide centers in the United States here in Los Angeles. And anyway, so needed to convince him that I was real about the idea. And he said, if you could find the resources, I'll work with you. And that's the next thing we did. And so our next circle of people you have to influence are folks who are willing to invest in you and your idea. And at that point, a not well-known or established at all organization. So in some ways, the hardest thing is when you're doing a startup is who's going to be the first money in to help you do things. And then the next level of influence, again, you're always thinking, what's the big picture goal? And it's your audience of young people. And how are you going to get the word out to them, as well as the folks that will support you? So you have to influence media. So you have to make allies with the folks that are interested in your story. You have to seek them out, pitch the story, and get press and coverage for what you're doing. And then lastly, you have to make sure that you're getting the word out on channels that the young people you want to serve are tuning into. And that all of those audiences, the means of reaching them have changed wildly over the years. And that's been part of what's been interesting about the journey. You have to always be willing to be flexible and adapt as you go along.
I want to dive into that idea that the world has changed a lot since you started the organization. But first, let's go back. This film, this Oscar-winning film, I think that is so cool, eventually launched a national, now a global movement. I wonder if you could take us back to 1998. And could you tell us about the moment when you secured an airing of Trevor on HBO with Ellen DeGeneres as host and discovered that there was no real place for young people like the character Trevor to turn when facing challenges similar to what he experienced in the film? And what did you do when you discovered that?
It was a shock. It came up in the oddest way. I was just on a phone call with a friend, my friend Deb, saying, hey, want to share the good news? We're going to be on HBO and Ellen DeGeneres is going to host. And you have to remember 1998, it's the year Ellen came out. She was on the cover of every magazine in the country. It was clear people were going to tune in. And that's what she said to me. Oh, this is so great. I bet a lot of kids, young kids like Trevor, will be watching the show. You should give them a place to call. And it was like, what a good idea. But I have to tell you, when I think back to the moment, it was electric. I actually felt something go through my body. And I actually had a moment of fear and paralysis. It only lasted a second or two, but I knew her casual comment was important. And after that moment, I just went, oh, it can't be that hard. There must be a line out there. And that's where I received accolades for Trevor as a director, but most of my career in film has been as a producer. And a producer, it's a great skill set. You're a problem solver. You have a vision, you have something you're trying to get made and done. You got to get a lot of people behind it to get it through to completion. And that's the part of me that kicked in. I was like, oh, there must be So I researched it. I found two numbers. They were only open on the weekends, but they said they were 800 lines. Reached out to both of them and didn't get an answer at either. And that was the moment that you realize you're faced with a choice. Do you just go, oh, I tried? Or do you make a decision to commit to solve the problem? I knew the high rate of suicide among gay and questioning youth. It was part of what motivated the person who wrote this piece in the first place as a sketch in a one-man show. And they knew that there had recently been a report on NPR about the gay and questioning youth were 4 times as likely to make an attempt on their life as their peers, as straight peers. That was what motivated me to make the film. I loved that the thing I knew how to do well, which is tell stories through film, I knew that had the capacity to reach people in a way a news story doesn't. Because film can make you feel things. It sort of bypasses when it's working. It bypasses the brain and it goes to your heart. When films work, you have a visceral reaction to them. And I thought I could capture that in this short film. And I think, and I'm very grateful for this, I think it shows it did. And the Oscar opened the door to this opportunity. So I realized that by God, there would be a lot of kids watching because it was on HBO Family Channel. And honestly, I wouldn't have been able to sleep at night if I didn't try to do more to find a way to help. So at that point, I just figured if there's not one, got to make one. And that's when I did reach out to one of the first people I had to influence to help, which was a very well-respected leader of a suicide hotline that operated here in Los Angeles, but its reach and reputation was nationwide. And Dr. Nagdeman, who was running that, was very interested in this. He was gay himself. He loved working with gay youth. And he said, I guess I somehow convinced him that I was legit. And he said, if you can find the resources, I'll help. So that's when I reached out to my filmmaking partners, Randy Stone and Celeste Lacine, the writer, and said, we've got a shot here at doing something. Do you want to join me in trying to figure this out? And of course they said yes. And that's where we established the Trevor Project as a 501c3. We raised the money, put together a board, and that was the launch of the organization. The thing that was a little challenging was we only had 3 months. At the point that I learned this, that there was no line, it was 3 months from air date. So had to do all of this and pull it together. And I will tell you, the clock was ticking. And it was 5 minutes before it aired that the last thing, we not only were watching the helpline, but we had to also launch a website so people would know where to go and if they had questions and information, and it had resources on it. But it was down to the wire. But we got it done. And I was at the call center the night the film premiered. I watched it there. And when the 800 number came up at the end, the phone started ringing off the hook. And it was a really powerful moment, Anthony. I started shaking and there were people and they just started answering and answering. And over 1,500 calls came in that night.
Wow.
And here we are. And they haven't stopped in 25 years. That's our 25-year anniversary this year. And it hasn't stopped since.
Annise Parker, former mayor of Houston turned president and CEO of the LGBTQ+ Victory Fund and LGBTQ+ Victory Institute, talks about the power of listening. Well, Mayor Parker, today you run an influential nonprofit organization, and previously you ran a major American city. What's the most important thing you've learned about influencing others to make an impact?
You have to be a good listener to be a good influencer, because you have to understand what your audience experiences from what you say and what you're putting out. But you also have to understand how to reach them. And the only way I know to reach other people is to listen to what they say at multiple levels.
I think that is increasingly challenging today, figuring out how do you reach people, because the media landscape is so fragmented and, there's so much noise out there. I'd love to know if you could just share some of your thoughts on the best strategies in today's sort of evolving landscape.
I don't know that you can really listen to people in an electronic world. I think you have to listen to people in in person as much as you can. Now, I'd say that knowing that it was impossible for me as someone who led a city of 2.3 million people to really, listen to everybody. It's also a matter of forcing yourself out of, we're all in our own echo chambers because it makes us more comfortable. And it's easy to fall into a rut of, I listen to certain information. I cannot listen to talk radio, for example. I just can't. Fortunately, I had people who worked for me who were willing to do that. But I also recognize that I have to strive to put myself into places where I hear other voices. I get new inputs. I challenge myself. And I think that's the other thing that's really hard for a lot of people is, we, as I said, we're in our own echo chambers. We want to validate the opinions that we have. And for a lot of us, I think we've lost the will to really want to be challenged. Some of that is just, as we grow older, we get set in our ways. We're comfortable with our life and our opinions. But it's always good as human beings to be open to new experiences and new ideas. It's just, I wish I had a facile answer for how we do that. It's more about, we have to push ourselves to be prepared to do it and to look for opportunities for more engagement.
This episode is brought to you by the George Washington University's College of Professional Studies. With in-person and online programs ranging from master's degrees in public relations strategy to certificate programs in digital communications, GW offers more than just the credentials to help working professionals get ahead. It prepares them to be leaders in their field. I'm a proud GW graduate myself, and I can attest that the faculty members combine academic rigor with real-world lessons that can't always be found in textbooks. Check out cps.gwu.edu for more information. Maya Ajmera, CEO of the Society for Science, is also a children's book author. She shares how overcoming failure helped her expand her influence. So today you serve as CEO of the Society for Science, and that organization is best known for several things: the Science News Media Group, the world-class science competitions, including the Regeneron Science Talent Search, which you participated in years ago, the Regeneron International Science and Engineering Fair, and the Thermo Fisher Scientific Junior Innovators Challenge. And then there's a suite of outreach and equity STEM programs that you all manage as well. But I'd love to start with the Science Talent Search because you yourself competed in this, and maybe you can talk a little bit about that interactive element, because that seems to be a thread there. But also I'd like to just hear, how has that program changed since you went from being a competitor to now being the CEO of the organization that runs it?
I loved science growing up. I did science fair experiments and projects, started working in a botany lab when I was in middle school, and competed in science fair. And then I went to an incredible high school called the North Carolina School of Science and Mathematics in Durham, the first public residential high school for kids who love science and math. And it was there that I started doing my research for the Science Talent Search project, then called Westinghouse Science Talent Search. And the thing about doing science is that you cannot you don't do science by reading it. You do science by doing it, by experimentation, by asking questions. And doing really great science at the age that I was 16 years old, I had great mentors and teachers, okay? And they were key influencers and how I thought about science, right? From everything, from middle school, from Dr. Prem Sagal, who was a botanist, to Dr. Vickers Burdett, and so on, to Dr. Margaret Holliday in college, where I majored in neuroscience. All of those folks, gave me sort of the base of how to think about problem solving, right? To think about the ethics and the science and the integrity of problem solving, and how to be curious and not to ever let failure get in your way. Failure actually gives you more answers than you know. So in that sense, science sort of opened my world in a new way of thinking about the world, frankly.
I wonder, I love what you just said about failure, giving more answers. I wonder if I could put you on the spot. I mean, when we go through your bio, you have had many, many successes, many accolades. But it sounds like, I'm sure you, like everyone, has encountered failures that you have learned from. And I wonder what jumps out as you think about that for your own experience as a leader, and perhaps particularly around this idea of influence, if that's, if that's appropriate to that question as well.
There's one particular story about failure. So with my first book, Children from Australia to Zimbabwe, the guys at General Atlantic venture capital firm gave me my Echoing Green Fellowship, and it was to start this first book because that was going to start the Global Fund for Children. Because I was going to be a Harry Potter, I was going to be J.K. Rowling and make millions of dollars, right? I thought every publisher would pick up the book, but I was turned down by every publisher. Mm-hmm. I had a publisher who wrote to me and said, "We like the concept, but we don't understand why you chose the countries you did, and you're not a named author, and we just don't think there's a market for it, for the book." And then Echoing Green was going to pull out their next year of support if I didn't figure out how to get this book published. I just decided to do something pretty radical, right? I had failed. I was looking at the mirror and I said, I'm failing. Nobody wants this book. The whole vision's going to go down the sink. And I did something in 1995, 96, when people thought you were nuts to do it, but I self-published Children from Australia to Zimbabwe. I got a book out from the library about how to self-publish a book. I hired an editor. I hired a book designer. I begged funders in North Carolina to give me grant money to create the book. And I would donate 3 copies to every school in North Carolina, public school in North Carolina. And with whatever's left over, I would sell them through a local distributor in bookstores. I did it. We did it. And the books that were in the local bookstores sold out. And the same publishers that had said no to me came back and said, Maya, we want this book and all your other books. And I said, well, I don't think so. And so I found a really interesting publisher in Boston named Charlesbridge that had great multicultural children's books. And I called on a late Monday afternoon, and this man answers the phone, and he said, hello. I said, hi, my name's Maya Ajmera, and I have a really great children's book called Children from Australia to Zimbabwe. Is this something you'd be interested in? And he said, well, Maya, this sounds very interesting. Can you FedEx it to me? I said, sure. Are you the attendant or something? And he started laughing. He goes, no, Maya, I'm the president and publisher of Charlesbridge. I said, what's the president and publisher of Charlesbridge answering their own phone? And he said, well, Maya, it's President's Day, and I thought you were my wife. And so I FedExed him the book. And 3 days later, he said, okay, let's make a deal. And we created the first nonprofit imprint, publishing imprint, called Global Fund for Children Books. And that's how the book, and they're still they're still our publisher to this day. So again, influence, storytelling, right? And the book became the influencer. I just want to also state, it's not only me, it was the book that became the influencer. That book and all the others become an influencing tool because, and I'll go to another story about influencing, is that books, children's books, get into a child's room with a parent in the most intimate setting, something that I could never do, right? I could do book readings. I can go to a bookstore. I could read to my own daughter. Yeah. And so our books got into these homes and people read about Global Fund for Children. And we got major amounts of donations because of it to people we would never have reached. And that's the same with Science News. Now I'm publisher of the Science News, and we have our magazine, and those subscribers who have read our magazine for decades and decades are now donors to us as well, because they want to see evidence-based science journalism, and they want to see journalism stay alive because it's a core to our democracy.
Yeah.
So I think of the magazine, I think of books, I think of them as influencing tools.
Yasmine Arrington Brooks, founder and executive director of Scholar Chips, was named a CNN hero. How did it happen? Well, let's just say you never know who's watching. Well, and I'd love to sort of dive into this kind of element that you and I have talked about before around authenticity and meeting people where they are.
To anybody really, but especially if you're a leader in any space, for-profit, nonprofit, education, entertainment, you name it, is to try your best to be who you really are and be your authentic self, because that is really what's gonna, as they say, your vibe attracts your tribe. That is really what's going to attract, if anybody's into like, the idea of like manifesting, right? Like what you exude is what you attract. So if you are on the flip side, if you're pretending to be something you're not, you might be attracting something you may or may not want to attract. But if you can find a sense of confidence and feel comfortable in being yourself, not necessarily looking like everybody else, not necessarily talking like everybody else, not necessarily doing what everybody else does, even though there's nothing wrong with, doing group activities, then you never know who you're inspiring, who's watching you, and who's following your lead, or who's looking to give you an award. Like you just never know.
Yeah, you never know who's watching. That's so true. And I think for leaders, that's a good lesson, because their own team, out in public, whatever it is, and just being your authentic self is the answer there, because otherwise it takes a lot of energy to not be who you are all the time too, doesn't it?
It does. And I'll say this too, don't be afraid of critique or critics. That it's gonna come, it's gonna happen. Not everybody is going to agree with every decision you make as a leader. Not everyone's going to agree with everything you say. And if we're in the wrong, then I think there's some space to maybe have some introspection or even conversations with whoever is across the aisle. But I'm just such a big advocate of being one's true self, and letting your uniqueness and your authenticity shine through. Because first of all, it just makes the world a much more cool, interesting place. So I'm just really big on that.
Now let's hear from Camille Stewart Gloster, former White House cyber and AI czar. To implement policies around technology, she had to find common ground, which she'll tell us about. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you have to influence different types of stakeholders in the work that you do in cyber and in AI.
Yeah, that's the whole job. A lot of the work is about getting groups that are motivated by different things to align in a way that advances a larger set of values or goals. Sitting in government, my job was to pull together the private sector, civil society, academia, and all of the agencies within the executive branch to align around where we should go. So when you think about AI, there's a real opportunity. This is like the burgeoning of the internet. So much about society is going to change, so much about how we search and, understand healthcare, and all of these things are going to evolve in the advent of this new technology. And that both creates fear, but so much opportunity. And we've learned so much since the advent of the internet about the kind of collaboration that needs to happen for us to be proactive and to build resilience and to prioritize things like security and safety up front, so we don't have to think about it on the back end. And so a lot of the job is, okay, I know you are to a certain extent motivated by the bottom line, but understanding that you operate in a global context, these things need to happen. As well as, okay, mission-driven folks, whether that's government or civil society, the mission is important, but, our economy must move forward and the innovation ecosystem needs certain things to thrive. So how do we balance the scales on these interests and move towards a common goal? And when you take the time to understand where both sides are coming from, you find that there are a lot more similarities than differences, and that the things that might seem different usually rely upon some of the other motivations. So for example, civil society might want to make sure that smaller countries are brought along for the journey and investments are made so that they can have access to the opportunity of an evolving technology, AI, for example. That benefits companies, expands their market, it creates a global ecosystem with more harmonized regulation and infrastructure and governance that they then don't have to keep changing and adapting to. And then from the government perspective, bringing everyone along for the journey, the internet is global. It's not, limited to one country. So doing this work from the outset with a global mindset only benefits the advancement of the mission from a government perspective as well. And so usually you can find some commonality, and that's where I start, understanding the motivations and then driving towards a conversation that's rooted in the commonalities and can build from there.
Okay, so that's obviously a really important lesson of sort of seeking to understanding those motivations, looking for areas of the commonalities instead of differences. I'd also just love to hear, I bet there are other lessons that you've learned in your journey about how to influence others, whether, especially very powerful people, right? Because you work with a lot of people who are very, very powerful. And what are some of the things that you know now that, maybe you didn't know as much when you were starting out, or you wish you knew then about how to really break through the noise, influence, get your message across, et cetera?
Yeah. I mean, first is truly understanding the boundaries and not overstepping them. I mean, there are some non-starters, some red lines for every world leader, industry leader, organization. And to have a real conversation, a fruitful conversation, you can't try to push past or blow past those. So, I mean, that is something that you should understand in setting the boundaries of the conversation you have. But to hone in on a piece of the first lesson, the understanding people's motivations and who they are and what their priorities are, whether that's people or organizations, is really integral. And not at a surface level, but truly understanding why, how they came to that understanding or that perspective is the foundation for any progress. Making assumptions about where people are coming from or why their perspective was formed in a given way and not leaving room for them to be heard limits your ability to have a conversation. So really focusing in on that as the foundation for any negotiation or conversation or opportunity to influence is so important. And then that'll help inform those boundaries and the way you negotiate and finding those commonalities, things like that. And consistent and open and transparent communication is also extremely important. Where you are delayed, where you are falling short, where you're confused, all of those things create an opportunity for candid conversation that facilitates the trust that you need to get from competing priorities to some sort of alignment. And then also sometimes you got to recognize when to give up. Not every issue can you make progress on at a given moment. And so it might not be ripe in this moment. So let's find some progress on another issue and then circle back at a time that is more beneficial.
Lia Haberman is a creator economy expert and author of the popular Substack, In Case You Missed It. She shares the importance of building a personal brand to become an influencer. What lessons you share with other leaders, particularly those who might be a little skeptical or hesitant to become a creator or build their own personal brand?
Yes, building your own personal brand, it's so important. Somebody had said to me recently, I was at a conference and somebody said to me, your newsletter is great. Like 5 years ago, nobody knew who you were. And now everybody knows you. And I kind of laughed because I thought, like, I've had this great,
You're like, gee, thanks.
long and successful career. But sure, yes, the newsletter has definitely put me on people's radars. And I think introduced me to more of a maybe mainstream audience than, whether it's like working at a company or being on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook or LinkedIn. It's just kind of opened up maybe avenues for me, than I had previously had. There's a speaker that I'm friends with in LA that does a lot of conferences, and her name is Goldie Chin. And she said, I actually wrote this down. She said, if you aren't talking about yourself or people aren't talking about you, then people don't know you exist. And that's Goldie Chin. And she does conferences all the time on personal branding. And it's so true. Like, you think that because you're doing good work, or maybe because you spoke at the company offhands, everybody knows what you're doing, how hard you're working, what project you're on. But everybody is so busy and so focused on their own efforts and their own output that people aren't thinking about the great work that you did. And so, I think whether it's a newsletter, whether it's social media, I do think that you need to be talking about yourself. You do need to be talking about the work that you're doing. You need to be talking about, and it's not all self-promotion. I understand somebody who says, I don't want to just be bragging about myself all the time. I don't want to be just promoting, myself. I'm not comfortable with that. You can also talk about your team. You can also talk about, shine a spotlight on your coworkers or even the work that your company is doing. It doesn't have to be all about you all the time. I do think you have to talk about yourself a little bit. But I do think personal branding is so important. It's something that, probably like the 90s to 2000s, that was kind of like when we saw that shift, especially with the dawn of the internet, email, then social media, then influencers and creators. It's just become inevitable to the point where, yes, now we all need to have or need to be working on our personal brand. And we all have a personal brand. Like, whether you want to talk about it or not, we have a brand. If people can look you up online or other people can talk about you online, you have a personal brand, whether you want it or not. It's basically what you're putting out there and what other people are putting out there about you. And if you're not contributing to your personal brand, that still speaks volumes about your brand. It essentially says that you're not opting in, and maybe you're not on social. Why are you not on social? Are you not comfortable? Do you not have the technical proficiency? Like, it is out there. And so I think it's better to take control of it and shape it in a way that you are more comfortable with.
Nedra Dickson, Managing Director and Global Supplier Inclusion and Sustainability Lead at Accenture, believes in influencing from the inside out. She shares why building a personal brand is important to driving impact in an organization with more than 700,000 employees. Can you tell us, who do you have to influence to achieve the impact that you want to see in the world, but also inside of Accenture?
Absolutely. Accenture has over 700,000 employees globally. And one of the stats that I always like to say is during COVID, we hired over 130,000 people. So those individuals did not go into an office. So they were not meeting anyone. So it was really key for us to be unique in how I was able to reach people, to really educate them on what is supplier diversity. And so I think that is one of the things that I had to do as I prioritize. How do I reach everyone internally to let them know the great things we're doing, but also the value add that not only we're doing for Accenture, but how we can bring these to our clients as well.
So obviously, supplier diversity is a world that you are a leading expert in and recognized by so many, but many people who are listening, or even maybe who work at Accenture, just may not know what that even means. So can you tell us about supplier diversity? What is it? Why does it matter? And how do you kind of sell that story so that people understand the importance of it in the work that you do?
I believe, when I get a chance to really sit down and tell everyone, what does supplier diversity mean? I take a step back and I let them know that most people resonate with inclusion and diversity, and that is that diversity of our workforce. And we really are focused on that. But when you start to think about your supply chain, your goods and services, and purchasing those, that is what supplier diversity is. And it becomes working with those small businesses and those diverse owned businesses that are 51% owned by an underrepresented or underserved community. And then I also want to put in the side that we're talking about now around ESG, the environment, social, and governance. And that social side, again, brings in the small businesses from those communities that large corporations like Accenture would have never engaged in the past. So when I put all of that together, supplier diversity is really finding those opportunities from those small businesses, from those communities that have been overlooked, underrepresented, and really integrating them into the supply chain when we think of everything. And especially now with the disruption in the supply chain, it is perfect timing to leverage these businesses.
Well, you can probably see why these are some of my favorite interviews. Each of today's chief influencers is making a tremendous impact in the world, and we're grateful they shared their experiences with us. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with your network. And until next time, Chief Influencer is a production of Social Driver. We help clients transform complexity into clarity with people-centered strategies. Whether you're looking to elevate the influence of your brand or your leaders, check out socialdriver.com to learn more. For show notes or to nominate a guest, visit us at chiefinfluencer.org or follow Chief Influencer on LinkedIn.